Thanks for joining us all the way from Germany. So this is Artem Shmatko. He's going to be talking about the project Delphi, which is on learning the natural history of human disease with generative transformers. Just some housekeeping. So if you're attending in person, please register on the tablet. I think you've all done that. The webinar will be recorded and made available online. Online attendees, please stay muted during the presentation, and there's time for Q&As after the talk. So about Artem, so he works at the German Cancer Research Center. He's a PhD student in the AI and Ecology division, led by Moritz Gerstung. His research interests lie in large-scale medical predictive systems and computational pathology, with a particular focus on real-world applications beyond curated data sets. And he's especially interested in model generalization and synthetic generation and diffusion models. So I don't really know what any of this means, so excited to hear more. Okay, I'll stop sharing, and I think Artem can now share his talk.
Yes. Let me see if the screen share works. And hopefully it does. Can you see my screen now? Or not? That's not the right one. Do you see my screen? Hello?
Hi, we can't see the...
So you can see it.
Yeah, that's it.
And now you can see it.
Now we can see it. Yeah.
Perfectly.
I think if you go on, yeah, perfect. Hey, all right, I'm just gonna mute.
Okay, so thanks a lot for having me here. It's really a great pleasure for me to present. And thanks for the introduction. So it means that I can jump right into the topic. So, and since I have the whole hour to present, I would like to start with from very far with the background. So I guess for all of us, the mode we want to interact with our diseases is the prognostication and prevention, and not really getting them. So, and say some century ago, the way we did it is that it was by some doctor. They used their expertise and their gut feeling perhaps to do the prevention. But at some point, the medicine advanced, and we started doing things like large-scale population screening initiatives. And for such things, it is very important to accurately balance the estimated disease risks. If we just use our intuition and gut feeling, it could inevitably lead to some people being overdiagnosed, some people being underdiagnosed. So people started thinking how to build formal mathematical approaches of estimating disease risks before a patient gets a disease. And perhaps the very first generation of such systems that were developed were just some handcrafted, expert-defined criteria that were used to estimate the disease risks. For example, in the 80s of the years of the previous century, the Charlson Comorbidity Index was introduced. And the way it works is that just there was some handcrafted defined weights people get for every condition, for having diabetes, for having stroke, for being old, and so on. And then these hand-defined scores are summed up, and the higher the value is, the higher the mortality risk is. So everything worked manually and was expert defined, but it already worked better than just the conventional one doctor-led diagnostic routine. So people saw a great potential in it. And gradually, the statistical frameworks that we had for these, they were enhanced, and we got more data. And gradually, it evolved to more sophisticated clinical score system that are used now as well. For example, these Q-risk model that is used in the UK for the estimating the stroke chance, and which is inside of it just a Cox proportional hazards model, which means a machine learning model. So you only need to define a set of predictors, confounders, and then during statistical inference, the algorithm would find the relative importance and optimize the model for the best performance. These models are very powerful, and they're used every day in medical practice right now. But yes, but they do have some drawbacks. For example, since they are since the predictors need to be hand-defined, it is difficult to take into account all possible conditions. And once the more possible confounders one wants to control for, the more sophisticated the statistical inference gets for such linear models. For example, at some point one would need to start using advanced imputation methods because rare data is very scarce and not always available, and so on. So we used to train such models in our lab as well, but at some point we just realized that it's very inconvenient. Also because they model only one outcome, and for example, if we are interested in cancer risk mostly in our group, and if we were interested in some like 40 different cancer types, we had to train 40 different models, and this was almost impractical if we wanted to go beyond that, not only cancer risk, but only all ICD, International Classification of Diseases, defined conditions. So we thought if there could be a more generalized, elegant way of doing this. And given the current agenda of AI, of course, we took some inspiration from the LLMs. The way the transformer models, that transformers are the architecture the LLMs are working on. So the way they use text is the way they see text is just a sequence of so-called tokens, or like words in a simple situation. And the way they are trained and the way they work is that they are only trained on predicting what the next token, what the next word in a sequence should be. But this is actually very similar to the modeling of these patient disease risks. For example, imagine you have a disease history with certain conditions, and what you exactly want to model is that given the previous sequence of diseases a person had in the past, what would be the next condition in the sequence? What would be the next predicted token? So following this analogy, we decided to take GPT architecture, the generative pre-training transformer, one of the early LLM architectures, but use not the text to train it, not the sequence of tokens, but the sequence of medical conditions. So we modified this architecture to accommodate our needs. But before we dive into what particular modifications we made, we need to do a little bit of statistics 101. So the usual statistical framework that is used for modeling the disease outcomes, it's called the waiting time models or time to event models, which means that imagine that for a certain event or for a certain disease, to be more concrete, for example, there is a constant rate of getting this disease, constant chance of getting this disease. So, for example, the probability of getting it during this time gap from T to DT is, say, lambda. It could be also dependent on time, but let's assume it's constant, for example. Then we can actually write down the statistical formula on what is the expected time that we need to wait until this event happens, given this probability of happening during each period of time, each year, for example. So this statistical distribution is called the exponential distribution and is widely used for applications of time to event modeling. But what if we want to model not the occurrence of one event, but the occurrence of several competing events? For example, if we are talking about diseases, one could have some rate of having common cold, migraine, cancer, diabetes, and so on. And to predict what should be the next event, we need to account for all of these potential possibilities and decide which comes first. So essentially, we need to sample from every of these exponential distributions, and then whatever disease gets the smallest waiting time, that would be the first disease to occur. This sampling from all these exponential distributions would be a very computationally intense process, but fortunately there is a closed-force solution. So if we have set of these exponentially distributed waiting times, we can actually model the event of at least one disease occurring within the time frame also as an exponential distribution. So essentially means that the sum of exponential distributions is also an exponential distribution. So and this rate parameter for this exponential distribution would be just the sum of the individual rates of the compound events. Okay, and this is actually a very important result, because unlike the tokens in the transformer, for diseases, we not only need to model what happens next, not only the next token, we also need to model when exactly it happens. For example, for tokens, the next token is always the next token. But for diseases, the next disease could be 5 years and 10 years and 20 years. And there's, of course, a lot of difference, and we want to model it. And this is the statistical framework that we will be using for it. So having the individual diseases, individual disease rates, we can model the common ones. That was the answer to the question when the next disease would happen, but we also can use the same mathematical formulation to estimate what exactly happens. So the probability of next event being the event I, for example, is just this fraction between the rate of this particular event divided by the sum of rates for all events. And this will be the answer to the question, what happens? Okay, so now we know how to, given the rates, to model what happens next and when it happens. We just need to train some multivariate logistic model to predict our rate, and then we're good. Well, and this black box tool that will take the initial input conditions and predict the disease rates based on it, that will be exactly our model Delphi. And now we finally can discuss what exactly are the modifications we made to the initial architecture. So as I said, the normally transformers would just predict the next token. So they answer to only this question, what happens next? And to also account for the question when it happens, we added an additional loss term and an additional head to the architecture that is responsible for time. And then, of course, we need to handle the time not only for the outputs, but also for the inputs. So normally, the transformer have so-called positional encoding. So that's their way to distinguish between the token at position 1 and token at position 5, for example. For us, these positions are not discrete and not defined as integers. For us, these are years. So like the disease that had happened at the age of 10, disease that happened at the age of 26.3, and so on. And to account for these, we introduce the continuous age encoding that is summed with the disease embeddings instead of the positional encoding in the vanilla transformer model. And then we also modify the so-called causal attention mask that makes the transformer look only backward when predicting the next token, which means that it just reasonably shouldn't use the data from the future to predict the current event. We modify it in a way that it accounts for ties, because again, in normal transformer, the tokens are strictly ordered. So you have one after another, but in our medical information, we can have events occurring at the very same time. And you want to mask these ties from each other to prevent the information leak. Okay, now we have the architecture and need to get some data to train it on. So our data sets that we use are the UK Biobank and the Denmark National Registry. So we train on the 80% of the UK Biobank data. It is around 400,000 individuals. The whole UK Biobank constitutes about 500,000 individuals. And 20% of this data we use as validation. And we also use the entire Danish National Registry as an external validation. We train these for the entire vocabulary of ICD-defined level 3 disease codes. So we predict simultaneously around 1,200 diseases. We'll touch it later as well. But for the time being, let's look at some real first results. So what is shown here are some graphs for 8 selected showcase diseases. And the graphs shows how disease rates, the y-axis, change over age, the x-axis. So in the bold starred line, we see the population average. So that's the ground truth disease rate that is calculated for the data, from the biobank data. And as the dots, we see the prediction our model Delphi made for these individuals. And there are two things to notice. First, the lines have vastly different shapes. For example, for septicemia, the shape of the curve is monotonically increasing, and there's no significant difference between men and women. But for the breast cancer, as expected, there is a lot of difference between men and women, but also curve shape is different because the age-related profile of the disease is different. But for all of these cases, the dots, they follow closely the line, which means that the model is able to correctly estimate the risk along all the lifespan. It is interesting to see that actually the dots, they only follow the line and don't lie precisely on it, and it is a good feature. So we do expect the model to understand that certain risks are certain individuals have greater risk, certain individuals have less risk. So there should be some variance and difference from the population baseline. So it is a good feature. In the very beginning, I started talking about how important it is to have balanced, well-calibrated risk for these disease prediction models. Otherwise, our large-scale population screening initiatives would be not as effective as one would hope to be. And it seems that Delphi is a very well-calibrated model. The calibration, meaning that if the model predicts, when the model predicts that the risk score is low and the chance of getting some disease is, say, like 1% per year, it doesn't mean that it is just low, and it's not just some vague relative score. It means that these people who get this 1% risk predicted, the chance for getting the disease for them would be exactly 1%. Of course, that's on average. So we can't, it is generally impossible to tell that your chance of developing cold within the next week is 29.7% or something, but because health is a very stochastic process. But on average, Delphi is a very well-calibrated model, and that is a very optimistic feature to see. When we look closely at all the diseases we work with, and again, it's more than 1,000 of different diseases that are defined in the ICD-10, like the International Classification of Diseases 10th edition. We can see that in the left, in the chart that shows AUC for individual diseases versus the number of occurrences of such disease in the data set, we can see that Delphi works really well for almost all diseases that have more than 200 occurrences in the data set, which brings the first limitation that is very expected to be there, that the model can only learn well if there's enough data for it to learn from. That's inevitable for these models that use statistical inference to get trained, but it's optimistic to see that the threshold of how much data is actually needed for it to train is not that high. I would say that like 100 of diseases is not that much, especially if we are talking of a data set of the size of UK Biobank that has like millions of different disease records. And in the right, we see the same plot. We see the same AUCs, but now they are grouped by the ICD chapter. As you can see, the model performs well across all range of ICD-defined diseases. We have also compared our model to various machine learning tools, as well as established clinical scores, such as Charlson Index, Q-Risk, Framingham score, and so on. And we have discovered that Delphi works better or as good as most of the competitors. We have also conducted the external validation on the dataset from Denmark. And in the plot, it shows the correlation between the AUC in the UKB data and AUC for the Denmark data. You can see that the correlation is quite high. And important to say that we didn't train at the Danish data at all. So the model was trained only in the UKB and then transferred for validation to Denmark. And this is how we obtained these results. And while, of course, there is some disparity, it is optimistic to see it because the healthcare system is vastly different. So the Danish records have certain disease codes that are not present in UKB at all. Of course, we can predict them, but it just as an indicator of how different these two data sets are, it shows that it is almost unexpected to see that there is the drop in performance is so small. Another interesting feature of Delphi is that it is a generative model. So just as LLMs, for example, they predict the tokens one after another, we can do this with diseases. So we can not only estimate the chance or the risk of the next health-related event, we can also simulate entire health trajectories. So in this autoregressive fashion, one token at a time, meaning that we predict the next disease, detect risk for the next disease, we sample this event, and then include to the inputs and sample the next one. But it is also well known that such models, they suffer from distribution drift. So meaning that the more tokens they sample, the further they get from the ground truth. So the more they collapse in a way. So to check whether Delphi performs well in this regard, what we did, we took, in the left, there is a schematic of this experiment. We took some of the patient trajectories from our validation EKB dataset, and then we removed all tokens that were after 60. And these before 60 trajectories we used as inputs for Delphi so that it can predict whatever happens next. So we continued the health trajectories from the age of 60. And then since for these trajectories initially we had the real disease that happened after 60 as well, we can compare whatever really happened and whatever was predicted to happen by Delphi. So here in the right, we have a comparison of accuracy of Delphi in this prediction of these future tokens in orange, and in blue we have the accuracy of a model that would essentially like a population average. So whatever we do not use when we don't use the personalized prediction, but we only do the age and sex expected next condition. And as you can see, Delphi performs better than this baseline, which is of course good to see. We wanted to also check how good it is at conditioning for certain events in the past when doing these generative sampling of trajectories. And to do this, we conducted the following experiment. So we used these, we again use these trajectories that have two continuations from the age of 60, the real ones and the sampled ones. And we stratified these trajectories into several groups based on some lifestyle factor, for example, like low and high smoking, low and high alcohol consumption, or BMI. And then we calculated the ratio of what is the disease rates for a certain disease for between the people in the, like, for example, the high smoking group and the low smoking group. And we calculated this false change between high and low smoking groups in these real after 60 diseases that happened for the people in the data set, and simulated continuations of the these trajectories after 60. And we did it for these three lifestyle factors, and as you can see, the correlation is rather high, I would say, given how noisy the data is. So, which means that Delphi can understand whatever happens into the distant past, and attended to accurately predict the future, even if it samples decades into the future. But here starts the most interesting part. So for now, we only looked at the model from the outside to see whether it performs well, whether it performs as good as the competitors, to check its various property. But now we can look into the model to see what it has learned. And the first thing that we will be looking at are the UMAPs of the disease embeddings. So for each disease, these 1200 of diseases that Delphi works with, to start processing them, the very first step in the neural network architecture is to map every disease to some like vector of this numerical representation that is used just because computers work with numbers. And each disease gets this numerical representation in the form of a vector. And on top of these vectors, we can calculate the UMAP, the low-dimensional representation of them, to see the structure of this latent space that Delphi learned. So here we have these UMAP, and it's each dot represents a disease, and the dots are colored by the ICD chapter. So eye diseases, cancers, skin diseases, and so on. And Interestingly, we can see that diseases with from the same chapter, they group together in the latent space. And that is somehow surprising because the model doesn't know about the existence of the chapters at all. It only it treats all diseases in the same way in some sense, so they are all equal for it. So this structure of bringing the same diseases together in the diseases from the same chapter together in the latent space, it's some emerged property, and actually we are not quite sure why exactly this happens. So the intuition that I currently have is that it uses it to minimize, let's call it the walking distance in the latent space. For example, imagine like the patient trajectory has some stroke or some ischemic disease, and which means that there is something wrong with the circulatory system, with the heart, for example, and of course that would affect the chances for this person to have another circulatory related disease in the future. And when the model selects the next disease, it in a way just needs to like point to some direction into the latent space and say that here are the diseases that are more likely to happen. And if it groups these diseases from the same chapter together, it kind of makes it easier, because all the diseases that you may want to point at, like all these circulatory diseases with an increased chance, they're together in the latent space, and you point once and you are immediately right. So we think that that's the explanation of this phenomenon. But also, it's not only the chapter that brings a disease together. For example, in this little zoom in, we have dots that are colored differently, meaning that they are from different chapters. But all of them are diabetes related, so diabetes itself and its symptoms and collateral conditions. So it also supports these hypotheses that it just minimizes this walking space by putting things that can happen together. Another interpretability effort that we conducted was that to try to understand what exactly drives the model in its decisions. For example, since Delphi is a neural network, and generally there are black box models, and it's really difficult to estimate what drives their decisions, we had to adopt a special approach for it called Shap values, or like Shapley additive explanations. And I'll give you some intuition on how it works. Like, for example, imagine we have this input trajectory to Delphi, and we know that on this input, it predicts that the chance of dying is 95%, like the death rate is very high. But it's not clear why exactly such a high death chance is predicted. So what we can do, we can mask out some random tokens in the input and use these masked token that is, for example, without migraine, use it to infer a prediction from Delphi once again. And we can see that without migraine, the chance of death is still high. Okay, so maybe it's not migraine that causes it. But if we mask out the brain cancer, the death risk significantly drops, which it doesn't imply causality, of course, but it gives some metric that shows the degree of interconnection between diseases. And this is something that we can analyze. So this is the whole thing is slightly more complicated, so involves masking also like doubles and triples and averaging all the results in an accurate fashion. But as the intuition, one can say that like the more the delta between masked and non-masked of certain token of certain prediction is. So kind of the more the masking one input token change the prediction of some output token, the more they are interconnected. And we can do this not only for death, for example, for here, and we have some possible explanation of some person having the increased risk for pancreatic cancer predicted. So we can see that here's like the baseline, here's the predicted value, here are the token that Delphi uses for the prediction, and those with red boxes that are associated with the increased chance of pancreatic cancer are various digestive system diseases or conditions. And similarly, one can do the same type of analysis for predicting the mortality risk. So in this case, the one biggest contributor would be pancreatic cancer that massively increases the mortality risk. And it is important to mention that these risks are not fixed. Like, for example, for some like Cox proportional hazards model, the whole name proportional hazards mean that for each of the conditions, of the symptoms, of the disease's history, of the lifestyle factors, whatever you call it, whatever you define your statistical model based on, there will be a fixed effect that makes the probability of getting a disease 2 times higher, or 4 times higher, or maybe lower. For Delphi, it's not the case. So since it can predict lambdas, these resist rates that we talked in our statistics 101 freely, it doesn't have to be explained by certain factors in a mechanistic way. The model is more or less free to choose whatever it feels natural. For example, here I'm just talking completely hypothetically, but here we can see that the pneumonia after the cancer, it also contributed a lot during to the overall mortality rate. But I can imagine that maybe the model just learned that after cancer treatment, people are immunocompromised, and any infection is particularly harmful for them. We did not check this effect particular, but we've seen a lot of similar things. And we didn't do anything special to encode this kind of knowledge to the model at all. It just learned it from data. So, and this property of being to learn anything from data, that's something that makes me most optimistic about that family of models. But then we are not limited to just explaining the contributions of some input diseases to the chances of some predicted disease risks for an individual trajectory. What we can do, we can estimate these in a systematic fashion. So let's look at the chart in the left, for example. So what we have all the diseases in the data set on the x-axis of the matrix. And these are predictors, meaning the input tokens. And on the x-axis, we have all the same diseases, but when they are predicted, so kind of the predicted risks. And at the values of the matrix, we have the these SHAP values, these token explained increased or decreased rate changes, and they are calculated over the entire validation data set, and that's just averaged into a single number. And we can immediately see that this matrix has some sort of block structure. For example, it seems that having one mental disorder increases chance of having, well, more or less almost all other mental disorders significantly. The same is, for example, for pregnancy. It seems that if something goes wrong during the pregnancy, the chances of unfavorable outcome due to various reasons are also elevated. But also some diseases, some chapters have, let's say, finer structure of the corresponding square. For example, here in the circulatory diseases, we can see like this small square. That means that like some diseases are interconnected, and some circulatory diseases have less influence on each other. Also notably that those who are the biggest contribution to the increased death risks are cancers, neoplasms for chapter 2 of the ICD, which I guess makes sense. But the plot that we looked in the left was only the interconnection between the tokens that are no more than 5 years apart from each other. So we just filtered out those. But we also can filter it vice versa, so only analyze the connections between conditions that are more than 10 years apart, as it is shown in the right. So you can immediately see that the whole thing is much more pale. So it seems the model learned that if something happened 10 years ago, no matter what it was, the chances that it influences your current health, or the extent to which it influences your current health, is generally lower. So perhaps one of the notable things is that there is bright pregnancy square where all the diseases were interconnected. It's completely gone, which makes sense. The pregnancy usually doesn't long for 10 years. But there are exceptions to this paling. For example, the mental disorders are still present. So it seems if you have the mental disorder 10 years ago, chances are it still makes your life not easy. And if you had some cancer 10 years ago, chances are your mortality risk is still elevated because there always is risk for recurrence. We have also quantified these temporal features of Delphi, because they are very interesting emergent property, because usually when people do standard disease modeling, it's not easy at all to encode these temporal changes of the hazard ratios into the models. But for Delphi, it happens more or less by itself. So in the left, we have the average change of the mortality risk over time after the disease happened for 4 selected diseases. And for in the right, we have the same one for Cox proportional hazard model, a standard way of quantifying these things. And as you can see, the general trends are the same. So for example, for pancreatic cancer, there is a rather sharp drop over time in the mortality risk. That is also observed here. But for for example, the myocardial infarction, it is also present, but the drop is much steeper and the initial risk is also much lower. One other big limitation that these models have is that since they learn from data, they will learn from data everything, including the biases that are present there. So one toy example that we particularly like is whatever we call the immortality bias. So for the UK Biobank, the average recruitment range for the participants was starting at some 40, 50 years, which means that in the records, we don't have any death that happened before this, because if you died at your 20, you would not have any chance to be recruited to the UK Biobank because it happens only at the age of 40. So in the we have the mortality rate versus age, and in blue we have the UK Biobank data estimated line that is estimated from the records we used for training. And as you can see, the mortality only starts being non-zero after 40 years, which is because of the explanation from before. And the model at the Delphi in orange, it learned precisely this. So before 40, that is not possible. Everyone is immortal. This is, of course, not the case. The real true trend, reported by the Office of the National Statistics in green, it's vastly different, but it's not Delphi's fault in the way that it happened, because it just learned from data every bias that was present there. There are some more interesting biases that Delphi learned from data, and one of them is, for example, source-related. So, for example, the way the patient records make it to the UK Biobank, the ways are numerous. So, for example, it could be reported by self-reported, or it could be the data transferred from the hospital the person attends, or from the GP, or from the death registry, and so on. And for each record, we actually know where exactly it came from. And imagine the following situation. Imagine I, for example, go to my GP, and my GP does his GP job very good and reports everything to the UK Biobank. So all my colds and migraines or sore throats that I went to my GP for, they are accurately represented in my UK Biobank profile. But I also sometimes go to the hospital for whenever I have stroke, for example, and the hospital does not report this data because of some technical problems. But since all of my serious conditions are not reported to the UK Biobank, my profile there would look like I'm exceptionally healthy because I only ever get headaches. And that's the only disease I have. And it seems that the model is being able to learn it. So just as with ICD disease chapters, it doesn't have any idea of the entire existence of these sources, but it seems it's able to infer it. So if it sees that there are only tokens from that are most likely are GPU reported, and we have tokens that are primarily only GPU recorded, like the disease types.
Sorry.
Yes.
Interrupt you. I'm just conscious of time, that some people might have meetings after this, because we're nearly to time right now. I just wondered whether we could take a few questions before we reach the very end of the meeting, or if you could just quickly summarize what you had left in your slides.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I actually have it's the penultimate slide, so I can just give me a couple of minutes and I'll be done. Is it okay?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
Yes, okay. Good. So essentially, the model seems to learn that, and long story short, it inferred this bias of this missingness of some particular disease sources, and for those cases when only one disease source is present, it learned to elevate the disease rate for the tokens that are specific for this source. Yes, and as a summary, so our Delphi is more or less a Cox proportional hazard models on steroids. It's unlike the normal Cox proportional hazard models, it's not tied to defined disease like hazard ratios, and is able to model multiple disease at once, but also because the model is significantly more powerful, it's also prone to learning the biases that are present in the data. So one should be really careful when using them. But hopefully the advantages overweigh these threats. So hopefully we'll see such models soon in our healthcare providers. That's it. Thank you very much. I have some links here. So if you have any questions, please get in touch. I will be most happy to answer them. And now as well, of course.
Thank you. I think we've got one question already online from Dr. Hans Johnson, asking, does the model actively adjust for confounders? But also, if people need to leave, I realize people might have meetings, do feel free to go. So yeah, the question was, does the model actively adjust for confounders?
I'm not sure that I understand the question fully, so I will try to answer it. So we do not, we have not incorporated any additional adjustments into the architecture. So whatever is possible to learn from the raw data is learned, but so far we don't do any additional adjustments that could arise from the known confounders and so on.
I think we've got a question in the room.
Yeah, can you add in extra data? Because obviously in the future, most people's genomes will be sequenced. So that's a very nice piece of additional data. So you're talking about some sort of multimodal type of generative model. Will that be possible?
That will be absolutely possible. And I haven't touched it yet because we are actively exploring this area right now. But I think another big advantage of using the transformer models is that because of the LLM boom, they're incredibly well studied. So it's more or less a solved problem of how to integrate additional data domains to it. So one could think of like genomes, of course, like in the most simplest scenario, we have the polygenic risk scores, and then the biomarkers, the medical imaging. So whatever additional data is available, it's only the question whether we do have enough of these data of other modalities to train the model. But technically, yes, it's definitely possible, and we are working on it right now.
Nice. I think we're at the end of the meeting, so unless anyone's got burning questions, maybe we can share your email on if people have other questions they want to email. Yeah. Cool.
Okay, thank you very much.